everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to see you all and meet you all. My name is Nicole Wong. I'm the creator of the Mahjong Project and author of Mahjong House Rules from Across the Asian Diaspora, which is here. I'll just leave it there. And it's so lovely to be on a college campus. I am a couple years out from college, and I just heard that there's a Mahjong class that is taught here, which is so cool. Like, cheers to you guys. And just this idea that Mahjong is becoming, like that is something that I would never could have dreamed would be a thing, especially when I was in college, that people are playing Mahjong in restaurants and nightclubs and bars and college campuses and college classes and getting credits, paying tuition to get to play Mahjong for 2 hours a week. So that's just so lovely. And again, thank you for having me, and to all the wonderful programs that are hosting me here tonight. So I started the Mahjong Project in 2022. That's when I kind of first publicly launched it. But it's something that I've been thinking about since 2018. Many people who I've talked to over the years grew up around Mahjong from a young age. So whether that's having memories of being in another room while elders are playing the game, or hearing the tiles shuffling, people falling asleep to the sound of shuffling. I interviewed a woman who was taken to Mahjong dens by her grandfather while he was supposed to be babysitting her. People having, it's very sensory, so memories of like smoking or cursing or loud voices and celebratory noises, and just all of these memories that Mahjong can kind of hold and encompass for people. That is, I've been so privileged to be able to hear so many different examples of that, of how Mahjong really, for so many people, is connected to these memories of family and people in their lives, like elders and people in their lives. If I'm honest, for me, this was my first introduction to Mahjong tiles. This video game here. And this is something I actually don't write about in the book because I didn't even really remember it. But this is an old Mac computer game where you have to match the tiles. And let's be clear, this is not Mahjong. So the matching tiles is not how you play Mahjong. But the tiles themselves, even when I've pulled up this screenshot, it was bringing back memories of these exact designs of it and the colors and the way that they disappear so pleasantly when you click on both of them. So I just say that because for me, I grew up in Southern California. My parents immigrated from New Zealand in the 1980s. All of their siblings and their parents live in New Zealand. All of my family still live in New Zealand to this day. My parents were born in New Zealand, and my great-grandparents moved from southern China to New Zealand, where they all were until the 80s when they moved to California. So I am a fourth-generation Chinese-American by way of New Zealand, which is something, again, that I didn't really think too much about. For me, growing up, I knew that my story was a little bit different because my parents spoke with Kiwi accents and they don't speak Chinese. And I knew that was kind of different, but I didn't really think too much about it. And so through this process, have come to really love this uniqueness and really think about how with Mahjong, it's something that has kind of carried with us through those generations. Growing up, I had a sense of Chinese identity, but when people would ask me, that question, that dreaded question, where are you from? I would get excited to be able to say, New Zealand. What do you mean? Like, what do you mean? Where am I from? Right. So just this idea that was like, it was part of my identity, my Chinese heritage, but also kind of removed from it. Right. That this was my first interaction with the game, with maybe not like the classic quote unquote Chinese American upbringing. I want to pause here and ask for the classic show of hands of who in this room has never played Mahjong before. Okay, so this is we got a high average here. I only saw about 5 or so hands. Who let's say who has played but is feeling a little rusty about the rules, maybe has recently come back to the game. How would you fit into that? Okay, so still maybe like a third of the audience. Wow, okay, so who plays regularly? Sounds like maybe there's folks here who play There's a lot of people who haven't raised their hands here. People play all the time, every day, once a week or more. Okay, all right, so I'm getting a good spread here. That's always good for me to know, just like where you all are. That's what I love to do when I teach Mahjong, kind of meet people where they are in their knowledge of the game, what they want to learn, whether they want to start from the basics or really dive into the scoring and strategy. So I learned how to play Mahjong from my grandparents, my mama and my yaya. On the left here is my grandmother, my mama. When my parents moved to the US, so this is my father in the middle here. This is 3 generations of Mahjong players, Wongs. And my parents moved to the US. They brought their Mahjong table and their sets with them, but they didn't teach us. We grew up in Southern California. It was very sunny there. We were outside a lot. My parents were busy raising 3 kids. And lately, when I've talked to them, they just said, honestly, they, we had some family in Los Angeles, but it just, I think for them, they moved away from their home and they associated Mahjong with their home and with their parents and their brothers and sisters. And so to them, just even though they brought the sets and tables with them, they just didn't seek it out. And so the Mahjong sets and tables sat in their garage for, I'd say, a couple decades, really. We didn't fish them out until less than a decade ago when I kind of started working on all this and we did a big garage clean out. So I learned from my grandparents one summer when I went to New Zealand. It was actually the summer after I graduated from undergrad. And I didn't have a job. It was the recession. So I decided to just go to New Zealand. And this was the longest amount of time that I had spent in New Zealand by myself. Usually I went with my parents or with other family members. And so it was really special time to just be with my grandparents and just, there wasn't any big family event or anything like that. So I just really just hung out with them and just did what they were doing. So watched a lot of TV, helped with cooking, helped with laundry, and played Mahjong. And my grandparents, they were greengrocers. So kind of like they had produce marts. They had 2 of them, one each. And throughout, like while my dad was growing up, they worked 6 days a week and Sunday was the day off. And the day off, they would play Mahjong with their other friends who had the day off on Sundays. And my grandmother would cook dinner and be popping up and playing the game while also cooking dinner. And it just was a real part of their lives, but in a way that it wasn't even, I think it took me feeling like a little bit of an outsider to my own family or some of my own cultural traditions to recognize like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what is this thing? So I learned how to play Mahjong and I came back to California and told my parents that I learned how to play Mahjong. And my parents were so amused. My dad thought that it must have been my grandmother's, way to find an easy target, that she wanted that, someone that they could take money from, because that, we play for money. It's never big money, but the playing for money is important to my family, even if it's like very small amounts. My aunt will just say like, why bother if it's not, if there's not a little bit of skin in the game. That's not how I run my events here in the Bay Area. And so I learned then and didn't think too much about it. In the meantime, I had graduated from college. I ended up getting some jobs. I worked in advertising. I worked for an Asian American magazine called Hyphen Magazine, where I really started to think more about Asian American issues and identity and storytelling, writing stories about other people and other interesting things out in the world. I definitely was like looking more outwardly about people in the community. My job was to tell stories about other people, and even within the Asian American world and experience, but never myself. I worked in podcasting, where my job was to write scripts for people and tell other people's stories. And this was all kind of happening in the background when the movie Crazy Rich Asians came out in 2018. On the right is also a still from the Joy Luck Club, which was the other big cultural touchstone of Mahjong in the 90s. But for me, Crazy Rich Asians came out in 2018, which seems like a long time ago already. But I remember seeing it in the theater with a group of friends and walking out of the theater and saying to someone, oh my gosh, the Mahjong scene was so fun, right? So cool that there was all, this pivotal moment. And I remember talking with friends and we didn't all, I guess me realizing that I understood the nuance of a little bit more what was happening than even my friend. And I guess I had just assumed that if you're Chinese American, you kind of know all the nuance of what's happening in the game. And so that was interesting. I remember calling my dad and talking about it with him. I remember looking up, I like to read, takes on films. I like to see the analytical takes. And I remember not seeing even on Twitter or anyone writing about kind of these deeper nuances about Mahjong. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, because not thinking about when a film like this comes out, it's such mainstream visibility for the Asian American community, but not just that, it's also the writers around it, and it's people who can, like the commentators, and this hole that I felt of like people not talking about this film in all of the nuances that I felt were available. I felt the same way with Everything Everywhere All at Once. Right? It's not just the piece of work that gets put out, but also the community around it that creates opportunities for people to talk about their knowledge and about their expertise. I also played Mahjong around this time with a group of friends, some of the same friends who I saw Crazy Rich Asians with. And I remember sitting down, and maybe some of you who've played Mahjong before have had this experience, sat down and realized, oh, we all have different opinions on how to play this game. We had different opinions on the rules, on how to score the game. And I remember feeling very confused about that. I didn't understand why. And then I started to doubt myself also. I started to think, maybe the way that I learned is wrong somehow, or maybe because it's in New Zealand, it's like weird and it's just different. And it felt really disorienting and kind of sad because I couldn't even explain all of those nuances. I also remember feeling like we were playing a similar game, but I didn't have the language to articulate how the way my family plays is different, which again kind of lit a little seed of an idea for me around why I wanted to get better knowledge of this. And then also we were playing with a set that didn't have the numbers written on them. And I shamefully could not, I don't speak Chinese or cannot read Chinese. And so that was also like a big moment where I was like, oh no, this is a thing that I feel is meaningful for my family and something that I associate with them, but also feel distance from that. And I didn't want to feel that. I'm also a person who's a board game person. And so I around this time too, I played Settlers of Catan with friends. I played this game Castles of Burgundy, and I remember spending a whole afternoon like reading the manual so carefully of how to learn this game. And I had this thought where I was thinking, why not Mahjong? Like, why isn't Mahjong? Why don't we think of it as a game that you can learn if given the right tools to have it like be accessible or more, just like have that knowledge more broadly shared. The screenshot on the right, this is an example of like online resources that I came across at the time. No shade to this one, but just, for me, it did not resonate as much for me. And it didn't make it clearer. And so that I knew that there was an opportunity here for both a personal project to this idea of documenting and preserving the way that my family plays, and then also to create something that is instructional and helpful and something that could help people actually play. And it was very exciting to think about that. And this is still 2018. So like many things, I sat on this idea for a while and thought, oh yeah, wouldn't that be cool to work on? Eventually, I started to work on it, and I would literally at tables like this, I would sit down and write things down as my parents were playing. And again, this feels nowadays, like when I was Googling back then, there were not as helpful resources as there are today. And even just things like this, like, is it counterclockwise or clockwise, is an example of something about this game that can be so confusing. And you can, even if you really know how to play, you can still end up going the wrong direction or counting from like left to right instead of right to left. There's just all these little things about the game. So I really, for me, it's just how I learn things better is to also write them down. And so this was the seeds of the idea of the Mahjong Project. This was working behind the scenes of, this like personal creative project that I wanted to do. Then the pandemic happened and everything stopped. And what we saw were very tangible examples of anti-Asian violence occurring in our community locally here in the Bay Area and more broadly. And as somebody who had worked in Asian American media before, I felt like I had some fundamentals around understanding what was going on and talking to friends. But it did feel that there was amongst both, across the age, young and old, there was a new sense of Asian identity that was also emerging, I'd say. And I feel like I can only speak to, people here, like Asian Americans. But it did feel like there was, in all of this pain, there was also people expressing desire to connect more across around Asian American identity, and kind of like sorting through that. Around the same time, Mahjong became a very hot topic on Asian American Twitter with this headline on the right. There was a controversy around a group that had decided to, quote, refresh Mahjong. And it was a huge talking point amongst many people. I was upset by this also as somebody who had already been thinking about Mahjong. I was like, whoa, what is happening here? And I do think that this idea. So yes, so lots of people upset, very upset. Lots of feelings. At the same time, I think there was this dialogue of like this thing is ours and you can't have it. Didn't always seem so productive. And so for me, like where I landed with it is I really just wanted to keep doing what I was doing, and for me, it just made me feel more resolve in wanting to document how my family plays. And I can't really control what everybody does, but what I can do is I can spend more time elevating my story and stories from people around me, and really wanting to kind of just take up a little bit of that space around it. So for me, it just made me want to continue doing what I was doing, looking into this very specific instructional, how to play, while also going more deep into my own family. And so because I was spending so much time with my parents asking them about how to play, is it right or left or which way, this other funny thing happened, which is that my parents would end up telling stories and anecdotes about specific people in my family and how they used to play Mahjong, or saying, oh, you should talk to so-and-so. They came out with a book about Chinese New Zealander history, so you should check that out. And so it ended up starting this kind of breadcrumb trail where all of a sudden I was doing more family research and talking to family members more about their lives and about their stories and interviewing them. And because I had this goal of launching, the Mahjong Project website, it was a really neat container in which to have those conversations. It was a reason to talk to my family in these different ways. And because I didn't grow up in New Zealand, again, I was feeling a little bit of that outsiderness, but it gave me that permission to ask questions that I hadn't really asked or thought to ask before. I think there's a really nice parallel with the game of Mahjong itself as well, because Mahjong is a game where you are sitting around a table facing each other, and there are enough pauses in the game that are very conducive to conversation. So while I was talking to family members about Mahjong and playing and memories, I was also having opportunities to play Mahjong and doing the same thing, where you're starting to hear stories from other people and starting to piece things together. So yeah, in these photos, on the right with the red tiles, that's my grandparent, my mama and yaya's house. I think it was my uncle's 50th birthday. He saw that when he saw that photo. Below, my brother and some of my cousins playing. There's always the kids table. That's another very resonant thing I've heard from many people, is that there's always the table that's the serious table, that if you're really gonna play, that's where you go. And then there's the side table that's kind of like the sideshow. No, you can kind of, the new family members of the kids can play there. And then also the photo with where there's always a baby in the corner. I think it's also the there's a baby who can just be placed there, and that counts as babysitting, right? Where everybody is just like gathered around. And you see that too. I found these other photos of my family as well, of my cousin, both my cousins here, right? So just this idea that Mahjong was part of, it was like there the whole time, part of my family story. On the left is my auntie, my grandfather's sister. And this photo was brought to me at one of my book events, actually, by a family member. And they said that, they're like, we've never seen Auntie Jessie smiling in a photo so big. Like this is a big deal. So just that idea that Mahjong really brings people's personalities out in this lovely way. I started to play with friends. So, okay, we've reached the point where I know the rules well enough that I can play with friends and start to collaborate creatively around Mahjong itself, both through a website, which I launched in 2022, and then also through kind of like visually. So this idea is that, as I've said, I wanted the game to feel accessible and instructional, but also beautiful, and also to encompass some of that joy and of the everyday. So, regular items like a teapot or some teacups or, a soup spoon can feel elevated, can feel special. When talking to parents and family members and asking them about Mahjong, I remember them saying, why are you doing this? Like, what's the big deal? Why do you care? It's just this idea that some of the things that we do every day, we don't even consider to be special or part of, worth writing about or worth documenting because it's so everyday. But in fact, those are the things that make us who we are and are so special. So getting to collaborate with friends to create images like this became part of my work with the Mahjong Project. I started hosting events as well that were pop-up events. So now we're starting to really seed these this idea of public Mahjong events, being in museums like on the left, going to street festivals, gathering with friends and teaching people how to play became part of the work as well. And it is so incredible to see when someone who doesn't know anything about how to play Mahjong starts to get it. It's the best feeling in the world to see that knowledge, that kind of the eyes light up and start the gears are turning, and that this game is something that can create that feeling for people of learning something new, being in a public space or being in a new space, not knowing people and then leaving with new friends or wanting to play again with people is just so exciting. I am going to do a very quick overview of how to play. I won't belabor this, but Mahjong, because it seemed like this is an audience that kind of knows how to play, but Mahjong is a tile-based game. The objective, so I always like to say, you imagine the tiles to be like a deck of cards, but instead of there being 4 suits, there's 3 suits, the circles, the bamboo, the characters, and then the winds and dragons, and the flowers and seasons, but also known as the flower tiles. And the object of the game, you get a random assortment of tiles, and the name of the game is to take turns drawing and discarding tiles to get them into complete matching sets or runs. The basics across many of the variations of the game is quite similar. But as I was saying, the things that help with references are, which way do you go? How many tiles do you do? What is the score that you get? And so really just providing a common language for people to then talk about the specifics was kind of revelatory, because I think for many people would talk. There are so many occasions of people talking across each other and not really knowing what even style they were playing, or thinking that they were doing it wrong and thinking that there was only this one way. So through those events, I was able to kind of piece together a lot of fundamentals around how the game was played, and have kept doing that for the past couple of years. And being able to have this fundamental knowledge is so helpful, because then it kind of makes me able to receive new information about how other house rules or styles, makes it easier to do that. And of course, when I got the book deal to write this book, I also did a deep dive into the history of the game. So the history of Mahjong is actually I found it to be very, very fascinating. The game is not as old as you might think it is. When I first started researching the history, there in books it would say that it was like an ancient game and that it was like many centuries old. And that's actually just not true. The game really emerged, the game as we know it really emerged in the late 1800s in China. It was a men's gambling game in cities, cosmopolitan cities like Shanghai and Beijing. The first appearance of a Mahjong set in the United States, and I'd say this, the caveat of the first documented set, was at a Chicago World's Fair in 1893, and as part of a exhibition of Chinese stuff, stuff being brought over from China and being displayed. Similar, it's around the time when there was a fascination with, silks and paper and kind of Chinese goods, which is very interesting to kind of think about as well. That the popularity of Mahjong at that time was wrapped up in the Orientalist fascination of things from the East. In the so that was the late 1890s. In the 1910s, there was a big expansion of the game, and it was a very intentional expansion of the game by some Western businessmen who lived in China. This man, he and his wife, they spoke Chinese, and so they were able to learn how to play the game. And like many people who have played Mahjong are like, oh, this is fun. I want to keep playing this. And I think this businessman in particular said, oh, I think I want to bring this back to, the Western world and sell sets and get people to play it and have this game spread. So again, to learn that the expansion of the game was also part of a very intentional capitalist-driven excitement to spread the game. Was very fascinating to learn about, but it happened, and so even it became very popular because the game, for many reasons. But at the time there was this craze. Like in the 1920s, there was jazz songs written about Mahjong. There was fashion collections made. There was theater shows around it. So it really was this fascination with it. The company would target, wealthy high society in the way that trends happen, so that it would seem like something that was elite and foreign and fascinating and interesting from that degree, and it trickled down. And so that that is part of its history. I also like to caveat too, when we do know, of course, that Asian Americans, Chinese Americans were playing Mahjong, but because of that, when we talk about the artifacts from the past that we can cite and that we can research and that we can find documentation of, in my book, that informed a lot of what I saw. And again, just brings me back to this idea of the importance of documenting our everyday traditions, having that proof of the everyday, because it really does matter to the history, into the future. So there were, so this is crazy. I'm always like, oh, it's like the pickleball of the 1920s or whatever. Lots of people were playing. On the bottom here, this is Fred Astaire. He learned how to play Mahjong. So there was, it was a thing. And it kind of fills it out because there were so many variations of the game. And there were a lot of companies that were trying to claim, this is the one true way to play. No, this is the one true way to play. And so it kind of ended up taking root in different communities around the country and around the world. And through many different means, the Mahjong sets and people playing it are all over the world and playing in all different variations. At the height of this craze, so the Mahjong sets at the time were made out of bone and bamboo. And there were bones that were being shipped from Chicago slaughterhouses back to China to be made into Mahjong sets. That's how popular, people couldn't get enough of the game. These old sets too, you saw, that's when they started putting the numbers on the set. So you can even have a very antique old set that has the numbers written on them. That means that it was produced for exportation. And I also just like to point out too that, during this 1920s craze, while Mahjong was really popular, this was still at the same time when the Chinese Exclusion Act was in effect in the United States. So Chinese goods being brought through, Chinese people not allowed to immigrate. So I do like to bring that up because I think it's important. And, relevant to think about in terms of how we engage with objects and artifacts of Chinese culture, or objects that have cultural heritage associated, but divorced from like the people themselves. So that was happening as well. And and this idea of modernizing something and authenticity, even in the 1920s, was a big subject and question about how to deal with this. So that was just so fascinating to learn about with this history. The game itself also just is, as I said, not as old as we think it is, but it does have these origins and ancestors of games. So the suits themselves are all representations of money, like coins and strings of coins and, collections of money. So that was, that's where those suits come from. The bird tiles on the right here, I like, this shows like the variety of the type of sets through time, because you're seeing all sorts of different materials, but also just this idea that artisans back then were able to customize a little bit with the engravings. And I think that's another thing that's just like really unique about Mahjong, that there is this like artist hand that you can feel in these old sets that I think is just very appealing to collectors or just people who are into design. And I don't know, I think that's another part that's special, the different color backings, the different way that things can be notched or combined, like this one on the orange is like wrapped around it. So again, I think just like part of the fascination is very tactile as well. Same thing, all these different materials that the sets can be made out of: bone and bamboo, bakelite, older versions of plastic. Just that were fascinating to feature. One note also I like to mention is that if somebody tells you they have an ivory Mahjong set, they're probably wrong. They might, but it's probably bone, made out of bone. I feel like that is a misconception I hear a lot, and also something that I learned a lot. Sometimes it's not their fault, because back then, even in the 1920s, there were sets that were sold as ivory colored sets, right? So it's like they were perhaps misled even when they bought the set that it was ivory, but it is not. So that's like a little PSA about Mahjong and old sets. Ultimately, this is a game that's about connection and community. I really think that there's a lot of reasons that's driving its renewed popularity today. I think one, in the aftermath of the pandemic, people are lonely. People are spending a lot of time by themselves. We are very online. We are craving real world connection. And I think something like Mahjong is something that brings people together and is a reason to get together, and also provides structure without being too overbearing in that. And I just think that it is this moment right now where we're really looking for ways to come together and look for a reprieve from all of that, to just be in community with each other, to learn something new, and to get off our phones, and to be able to go out and not have to, drink a lot or like buy a lot of drinks all the time. It is a thing where you can just go and play, not have to spend a lot of money necessarily. And there's just so many reasons that are resonant there. I also think that on the side of culture and heritage and, making the game your own is something that is so exciting. These are two examples of fine artists who are both Chinese American, or I think Peter's Chinese Canadian, but this aspect that it resides in that memory, right? And it is inspiring to bring in your heritage and culture, but also create works that are new, interesting, artistic works that kind of draw on childhood, but are something new as well. We're proud of our heritage. We're claiming our identities and taking up that space. I think that I talked to some people too, where because of people's association with gambling, that Mahjong has with gambling, some younger folks also, it does seem like a little bit of rebellion to play Mahjong because their parents tell them that they shouldn't be playing. And so I thought that's something that I hadn't considered until I talked to this person, that actually it still is, a little bit of your classic young person doing things that they feel like they shouldn't be doing as well. Because Mahjong can be very wholesome, but it can also, it could also not be. So, So yeah, I like to show that as well. I've come to think of Mahjong to be like a family heirloom of sorts, or like a folk tradition, and that really helped unlock some understanding for me, because it's a game, and so it's not tangible. I mean, there are physical sets, but the way that you play and my effort to document that feels a lot like trying to capture something like ephemeral. And so figuring that out, there was a trick to that. The set you see here is a set that belongs to my parents, and they keep it in this tin. Like, that's actually the tin that they keep it in. And so I also think of it is kind of like a time capsule as well, in that sense. What I learned about why the way my family plays seems so different, and the scoring feels so complicated compared to other styles, is actually because the way they play is exactly the same as like my great-grandparents who played. And so in New Zealand, I think because New Zealand is pretty small, and I think the Chinese community was quite tight-knit, they were able to retain the way that they played Mahjong in the early 1900s, and they just kept doing it that way. So they do refer to it as old style, or it just didn't change, where perhaps in China, in the home country, or in other parts of the diaspora, the game did evolve to suit needs. Maybe, it's not for people who are going to sit and play a whole game together and have the poker chips to exchange. Maybe it's going to be a faster method where you're playing somewhere and you're not playing a whole game, and so you're not using the chips, and you don't need a table, and maybe you can just set it up. So just thinking about how the way my family plays Mahjong is kind of a like a trace of my diasporic identity, and like can go all the way back in time, was really wild to think about. And especially that idea that I mentioned, that I don't speak Chinese anymore, and so there are many elements that I feel like I don't have access to anymore. But with Mahjong, like, that is something that somehow carried through. I also like to compare Mahjong to food culture, and this idea of family recipes, and how everybody, because the game is usually taught through oral tradition, it can be adaptable. And I learned so many different variations of the game, mostly through people who came to my events, and learning about, Filipino style or Taiwanese style or Singaporean or Malaysian or American Mahjong. Like, there's just so many different ways that people now play the game. And for me, it was exciting in the book to really focus on the Asian diasporic styles, just because I didn't see that written down as much in other places. And I do think that sitting and eating a meal is kind of similar to playing Mahjong as well. This is the book. I already showed the picture of this, but with the book, it was such a privilege to be able to make. I really wanted to make it approachable and accessible to people. I really wanted to bring in creative collaborators when possible. I got to feature my parents. Those are my mom's hands in the photo, and my dad's hands are also in it, as are my editors, because we needed another person. But there's just all these little Easter eggs in the book that I felt like I got to put into it. It was interesting. I was showing the book. I was at a book event, and somebody came up to me, and he said to me, how did you convince somebody to let you make a book this nice? Which I just thought was so interesting to me, because it was like, what do you mean? Like, why not? Like, I think it was very telling, kind of how much that, like, I don't know, I won't speak for everyone, but, perhaps we as a community, like, don't think that the things we do are worth, like, pretty books or nice things. Like, why not? Like, why aren't the things that we do of interest to people? I will still get, like, calls from family members asking me to, like, order them a book, and I'm like, it's in a bookstore, you can get it there, right? So just, like, we're still getting used to this idea that other people want to know about, like, things that we do. And so, it's been new for me as well. And again, I think just, like, specifically for this talk, I was thinking way more about this idea of preservation and documentation, and there's so much more out there. For me, it was just, I chose Mahjong specifically, but so many aspects of our lives that are worthy of that, the glossy cover and what have you, which is, I guess, like what I encourage and hope for people. Today, you can find Mahjong clubs in most major cities. There's a lot of talk and coverage of Gen Z and what they're up to. One thing that some of them are up to are playing Mahjong in dimly lit clubs. And that has been so fun for me to go and be a part of. And here, that is here in San Francisco. And I think what is really wonderful too is that a lot of the venues are owned by Asian businesses or restaurants and spaces. I think there just is a broad interest in bringing people out and having people gather together. I also really like to note that all of these clubs that exist, it's very bottoms up. It's very much just people, like a person starting a club and then getting friends to come and then it becoming a thing. And that has been really true and very neat to witness that it's all just different people who are all just kind of compelled to start doing this. There's no big governing agency or body or anything like that, like telling us to do it. It's just people like feeling compelled to play Mahjong and create those spaces for other people. Another part of my work with the Mahjong Project is bringing together these memories and these documenting some of these different things. I find myself now, because Mahjong is a thing that people like to talk about, it's also a good entry point. On the right here, this is the artist Frank Wong, who is made these really beautiful miniatures of scenes of Chinatown. They're on view at the CHSA, the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum. And yeah, I was able to interview him just because I wanted to collect his story about Mahjong. But of course, we ended up talking about all sorts of things in his life. And that it is what I hope to that's what I hope to do more of with this project, is just documenting some of these stories and hearing them. And if Mahjong is a good entry point, then so be it. On the left here, this is a board that is from a club in Santa Cruz that does this Post-it note thing. I've done similar things like this at events. And yeah, because so many people have these memories, which maybe we'll hear some this evening. And yeah, lastly, just kind of in closing too, just the idea of kids playing. So again, everyone talks about what Gen Z is doing. I like to talk about what Gen Alpha and Gen Beta are doing. And I have a 1-year-old now. I actually was pregnant for a lot of the time that I was writing the book. And this idea that Mahjong is a game that young people, really young people can take on and just learn like any other board game, like Go Fish. If you can play Go Fish, you can basically play Mahjong. And that is really exciting for me as well. This idea that what I've done has helped be a connecting link in the chain to just keep this tradition going forward. And hope, like many other traditions, but this one in particular for me. And it's just exciting to see that in real life. In the middle here, this was an event I helped organize in New York City last weekend where we did a giant Mahjong game, and kids were so into it, and we were able to teach them very quickly. I think kids learn the game actually faster than adults, and just able to bring that on and carry it forward. And I like to close with this just beautiful image of what we all, this is when we shot this is in the book, of just this, we were this is the centerfold, and we just wanted to encompass all of the good luck and riches that we want to have. A lot of this photography, I should also mention, is by Andrea Lowe. She's a brilliant photographer, and she also did the photography for the book Chinatown Pretty, if you're familiar with that book. And I felt, so she's a friend. We've been friends from that Asian American magazine we used to work for over a decade ago. And so, getting to create things together was so fun. And that's my talk about Mahjong.